Good morning, everyone. I know it's early for us. It's going to be a long day. I'd like to welcome you and also acknowledge that we are on the territory of the Coast Salish people. And also I did a little bit of running around today. It is also Administrative Assistants Day. So I'd like to thank all the administrative assistants in CVRD, which for us it's a large group. And I'm looking for an approval of the agenda. So moved. Second. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Adoption of the minutes from March 28th. Moved. Second. All in favor? Was there a second? Sorry, I didn't see a second hand. Everyone's got their head down. Thank you. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes?
No business arising, Madam Chair.
Great. We'll move on now to the public input period. The purpose of the public input period is to provide the public with an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before the board, committee, commission considers the items. The public input period procedure policy provides for the public input period to proceed in a timely fashion. Public input period items cannot include matters which are or have been the subject of a public hearing. Is there anyone in the gallery that wishes to put in some input? Come forward, please, and just state your name.
Good morning, all CVRD directors. I'm here this morning to have a few words about bylaw 4202, the proposed drinking water and watershed protection service. Currently, how many studies have already been done for these areas that are included in this bylaw? In 5 years, you will have spent over $6 million on planning and studies. In 10 years, you will have spent $14 million on plannings and study. This seems to be an awful lot of planning and study and $14 million in 10 years. The RDN bylaw 1556 only has 3 service in their bylaw, and you're putting in 9. Theirs seems to be working quite well, and I find 9 excessive. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Your name? Sorry, we didn't. Lynn Smith.
Lynn Smith, Saltair.
Thank you. And if you would like to speak, come forward.
Hi,
Good
Jill.
morning.
Good morning. I'm Jill Thompson. I live in the Cowichan Station area. Many of you may know me. I also provide services to the Cowichan Watershed Board and have done that for about the last 4 years. I just wanted to make 2 comments. One is that I work on water conservation for the Cowichan Watershed Board, and so we try to educate residents about recognizing water waste where it's present and learning how to live comfortably with less water waste. And a lot of the tools that we wish that we could pursue, I jealously look north and south of us to the CRD and the RDN, where the councils have the latitude to do things like cistern incentives for water cisterns to capture our rain that falls plentifully in the wintertime, but not in the summer. And I think that's just a great system, because it doesn't really matter who captures the rain, and reduces our water use and reduces the load on the stormwater outflows. Doesn't matter who does that, we all benefit. So I think it makes sense that that's a great use of taxpayer money. Everybody gives and everybody benefits, and so I would love to be able to see the CVRD be able to do that kind of thing that our neighbors both north and south can do, and we're restricted from doing right now. So that's just one example of a direct thing that I would love to see come out of this. But then the second thing I wanted to point out is just that it doesn't seem, the conversations that I've been listening to about this around the table seem to be a lot about what you're going to be stuck doing. And as far as I understand the process, the board would get to vote every year. You would get to look at a work plan for the upcoming year and decide based on that what you're going to requisition, if anything, what you want to support, what you don't want to support. So I feel like this is about the opportunity for citizens like me, parents like me, to get to look into the future and have my own voice. This board decided a few months ago to put it to a referendum, that it wasn't, that you weren't going to make the decision on our behalf. You were going to let citizens make the decision about whether or not we wanted to invest in our water. And I would really like to have the opportunity to vote myself. So I hope you will continue on that path. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Is there anyone else?
Good morning, Tom Rutherford, Cowichan Watershed Board.
Morning, Tom.
Good morning. I spoke to this group at your last meeting, and I told myself I wasn't going to get up and talk today, but I think this is really important. And I just wanted two quick reminders. One is that I'm 61, and all my life I've taken water for granted. I don't think we can afford to do that anymore. And there is always a risk of doing something. There's a risk of spending too much money, or not enough money, or having too broad a focus or too narrow focus. And those are the tough decisions that you've been tasked with making. But I would remind you that there's a risk of not making any decisions. There's a risk of doing nothing. And I think when it comes to our water and our watershed, the risk of doing nothing is substantive. And so that should be part of the process of making the decision. The other point I wanted to make is the work you do is not easy. I get that. And you're tasked with a responsibility of representing the people that live in the valley. And that's a relationship of trust. And I think that's what governance is about. It's about relationships of trust. And when you're making decisions around water, or indeed around land, again, I remind you, you're not representing only the people that live in the valley now, but you're representing future generations. And when it comes to water, that's a big responsibility, and I don't envy the role you have, and I respect the work you do. It's hard work, but I would ask you to think about that you are making decisions for future generations on water, and the risk of making a mistake and the risk of not doing anything are very substantive. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Seeing no, oh, there we go. Come forward.
So, good morning. I'm Shannon Waters. I'm the Medical Health Officer for the Cowichan Valley region with VHA. And I just wanted to make a comment around water as well. I'm going to be talking later today about air, and water, like air, affects the health of every person in this region. I wanted to say, really having an integrated approach to water as a collective issue across this region is becoming increasingly necessary as the population grows, and we're dealing with climate change, drought, and especially water supply issues. Data was talked about, data gathering. I think, more so than ever before, we need to have better data about what our supplies are like, what the quality is like, how different seasons affect things going on, and how we can plan collectively moving forward for it. We need to have more efficient water use. We also have incoming Ministry of Health guidelines for safe drinking water that I've talked with some of the people around the table around. And yeah, so we really need to look at this collectively, have a vested interest. And around the province, across the board, I've particularly been talking about climate change and drought and what that means to water for all of us. And I think, we're really in an unprecedented time for collective planning for what things will look like in a few generations. And from what we've seen projected, it's pretty sobering what we might be up against, and it's going to cost money and focused effort and a lot of people coming around a table like we have here today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no one else coming forward, I'd like to move on now to correspondence.
No correspondence, Madam Chair?
Information.
No information items?
Move on now to reports. We have R1, report from the Senior Environmental Analyst about the regional airshed. And this is for information. Good morning, Keith.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, directors. Do want to thank you for this opportunity to share an update on the airshed protection activities, as well as have an opportunity for direction into 2019 work planning. And so With that, wanted to provide that refresher on our regional airshed protection strategy that one of the top-level goals in the strategy is to collaborate and work with our partners. And so on that note, with us here today, we have Earl Plain from the Ministry of Environment. So he is our regional air quality protection specialist. We also have Dr. Shannon Waters, who will be sharing as well on an update on information around health impacts. And so we appreciate her perspective as our medical health officer for this region. And so, and then once we've had the chance to hear from both Dr. Waters and Mr. Plain, we'll move on to an update in terms of what are some of the highlights that we've been seeing here in this region. So, with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Earl Plain, and he'll walk us through some of the highlights from the data standpoint that we've seen in 2017. So, thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's been a little while. I've seen a few of you more often than others, but great to be back here again. Thank you very much for having me. And as Keith mentioned, I'm here co-presenting today with Dr. Waters. Just an opportunity to give you an update on air quality and, I guess, health in the Cowichan Valley. So I'll try to keep it sort of that 15-minute range. I hope that's okay with your agenda. So most of you know we have, I've got, this is just a map of the Cowichan Valley and where we're currently monitoring air quality particles across the diameter of a human hair. Very, very fine particles. And of note, it's important to recognize where these things come from. They're generally mainly generated from combustion sources, so anything you burn will generate these things. So any fuels, whether it's wood or fossil fuels or just anything that's burned will create these things. And then, of course, secondary chemical reactions in the atmosphere will also create these things. And the biggest, whoops, I'm not sure what happened there, it went black. Okay. Panic. No, I'm good.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, the biggest reason we're interested in these things is because they're so fine, they get past our body's natural defenses, and they enter the deepest recesses of our lungs and can cause health effects. And with that prompt, I'll pass it on to Dr. Waters here for just a discussion on health effects.
So, as Earl is saying, these things are very, very tiny. We don't necessarily see them, well, we don't see them in the air, and we need to be concerned about them because there's health risks. It can penetrate very down deep into the lungs and get into the bloodstream and cause things such as decreased lung function, chronic bronchitis, increased respiratory symptoms, cardiac arrhythmias, heart attacks, and premature death. And there's many different groups that are more sensitive to this than others. People with heart or lung disease, older adults, children, and pregnant women. And so what this can look like across the country and BC as a whole, and this is a triangle that is used in a lot of different types of health conditions and its effect on the population. We can have, lung function changes, immune cell responses going up to things such as asthma attacks, medication use and symptoms. Then people might need to visit the doctor, or go to the emergency room, be admitted to hospital, or even die from these effects. It's very difficult to measure this type of effect, so there's been some modeling that has been done, and the Canadian Medical Association did a particular study which shows for 2015 what we expect this burden to be here in BC, so not an insignificant number, about 585 deaths projected that happened across the province as a whole, and certainly you need to think of weather changes and different things that might come into play there. Specifically in the CVRD, when I mentioned the populations that were more vulnerable, we have a very high proportion of people who are vulnerable within the CVRD. We have high rates of asthma. That first graph on the left there, the purple line is our burden of asthma in our community compared to Island Health as a whole in blue, and the province in green. For chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is another condition that makes you much more vulnerable to air quality, you can see the purple line there of the burden in our community for Cowichan, much higher than for Island Health and BC as a whole. And then also children, who are some of the most vulnerable as well. For respiratory disease, that graph on the right, you can see in purple again, we have very much higher rates of hospitalizations for children 0 to 14 years old compared again to Island Health and the province as a whole. So we specifically need to be concerned in the CVRD because we have a very vulnerable population regarding this issue. This is some very specific data for the local health area of Cowichan, and we worked with the BC Centre for Disease Control to get some specific data about what it meant this past winter. So this is statistics from the past winter when we had higher PM 2.5 levels, and what that actually meant for people visiting the physicians. That was one of the levels in the triangle that I brought up, and also medication dispensation. So salbutamol there is the blue Ventolin inhaler that some of you may be familiar with that people need to take when they're having difficulties breathing. So if you take a look on that first graph there, over January, you can see some times when the PM 2.5 peaked, and at one time in particular, the red, which is showing like a much higher than background level number of physician visits. We did have higher visits that showed up during one of our times of higher PM 2.5. And then on the right graph, this is the Ventolin dispensations. And so some people have, they don't need to see their doctor to get more Ventolin. They might have refills that are available to them at the pharmacy. So some people think this is a bit more sensitive to actually see what's going on. And when we look here in the valley, we can see that at a number of times throughout this past winter, and at times when you can see there is a bit of a rise in our PM 2.5, that there was more Ventolin being dispensed in this community, and it was correlated with when PM 2.5 levels were higher. So we have seen as recently as this past winter, the effects of air quality having repercussions for people within our community.
Thanks. So I guess I wanted to speak a little bit about where these PM 2.5 particles are coming from. And we've done a fair amount of work here over the past 3 or 4 years, developing the airship protection strategy and a number of studies that went into support that document. And one of them was an emissions inventory that was done back in, I think it was 2013, 2014, using the 2011 base year. And what we found in looking at PM 2.5 sources in the valley here was that open burning and wood stoves accounted for about 3/4 of all PM 2.5 emissions in the valley. So it's a pretty easy thing to look at those two pieces of the pie and go, okay, well those are good spots where we can start to focus on managing those sources and get a pretty good bang for our buck. And when we talk about open burning, I'm talking about forestry burning, I'm talking about agricultural burning, commercial open burning for development, and then residential backyard burning. So there's a number of different things there. But another thing to consider when we're thinking about managing these types of sources is that they're not all equal. So source location and timing is really important when we look at where these sources, how these sources impact on people. So for instance, a hazard abatement burn by a forestry company where they're burning 10 or 15 piles that's 20 kilometers from a community, it shows up in that emissions pie, that chunk of that pie. But it's well removed from the community. They're likely burning under regulation, which means they're burning under good ventilation conditions. It's a little different than something like a wood stove, for instance, on the bottom right there, where we maybe have 4 or 5 wood stoves that maybe aren't operating the best that they could be. Very, very small emissions in terms of the emissions pie, but in terms of where those emissions are being emitted, right where people live, work, and play, very high inhalable fractions. So the people are really exposed to that. So those are the kinds of things we think about when we're trying to minimize impacts on people and the environment. And then also the time of day, so when we're burning, when those types of emissions are being emitted. If they're being emitted under good ventilation versus poor ventilation, it's going to make a difference in terms of how much those emissions are going to build up. Probably haven't shown you this chart in a long time, but so this is all of the data that we've collected from 2010 to 2018. And each of those dots represents a daily average PM 2.5 level, and it's against our ambient air quality objective of 25 there in red. And what you'll see in this data is sort of a cyclic pattern. So you see peaks and valleys throughout each year. And generally the valleys represent periods of time when PM 2.5 levels are low, and those occur during the warm season. So generally between sort of April through September. And then things change and we start to see these peak values occurring through the fall and winter months, and then it comes back down again, it repeats itself. I guess the anomalies, of course, are wildfire smoke, which we had a really bad year in 2017. Anybody that lives here can attest to that. But what's happening during those winter months? It's really, there's a couple of different things happening. Changes in meteorology, so lower sun angle, shorter daytime periods, less heating at the surface, so it creates poor dispersion, and then a real change in that emissions profile. People idling their vehicles more, people that typically rode their bikes maybe in the summertime are jumping back in their vehicles. I'm guilty of that, I'm a fair weather rider. So those kinds of emissions, the emissions are starting to increase at a time when dispersion is getting worse. Another thing to keep in mind is those two big chunks of the emissions inventory that make up 75% of the emissions, they all occur at this time of the year. So basically, you end up with your open burning period occurring right after the Ministry of Forests drops their burn ban in mid sort of September, end of September, through to maybe the end of November, and then wood stove impacts as well. So all of those emissions are compressed into about a 3 or 4 month period at the same time as dispersion is at its worst. This here, I'm sorry about the table. I put this up here just to give you an indication of what's, I don't know if I can use my mouse or not up here. No, yeah, I can. These are just annual averages from 2010 right down to 2017. And I've got with wildfire smoke and without wildfire smoke. And when the numbers are in red, we're exceeding our ambient objective level. When they're in black, we've actually come below that. And what's been nice with the work that's been done here over the last 5 or 6 years, we've actually seen a decline in PM 2.5 concentrations through 2014, 15, and 16. And then with the wildfire impact there in 2017, we saw a bit of a spike back up again. So the work, we've been doing some great work, a lot on different fronts. We've started to see some of the benefits. The wildfire, of course, a big impact. I've taken out the wildfire smoke impacts here on the next column just to show you what impact that had. It was about a 1 microgram per cubic meter increase in annual average. But what that also shows is under our short-term objective level, which is the 24-hour value of 25 micrograms per cubic meter, we still see that even without wildfire smoke, we had some really big numbers in 2017 that actually pushed us above that level. So there's still some work to be done, and I think everybody that lives here again noticed that we had a lot of open burning going on this past fall that was, it caused some problems. I won't spend much time on this other than it's just a chart that shows the same information. This is Duncan Carnsmore and sort of a slowly declining trend to 2016, and then that spike here in 2017. I'm just going to leave that one for now. So the good news with that declining trend that we've seen over the last four years is that we have moved from a red zone community under the federal air zone reports into an orange zone. So we actually have improved, which is great. Doesn't mean our work is done because we moved from red to orange. It means we've got to keep being vigilant and keep working on those areas that we need to manage so we don't get back into the red zone again. And this is just a chart that shows where Duncan and Crofton sits in relation to other communities within the Georgia Strait Zone. And we're generally we're just below this is the federal number. It's a little less stringent than our provincial number. So their objective level is 28 and the annual average is 10 versus our 8 and 25. And we're generally, Duncan Carnsmore right now is sort of in that 3rd or 4th place on the island here right now. This is just a quick update on a pilot program that we put in place last fall. And this is part of the work that's being done under the Airship Protection Strategy. And it's a way that we thought we could reach out to the public and give them an opportunity to see what effect their activities have on local neighborhood air quality. So really, we took a whole bunch of sensors, low-cost sensors. They're not as accurate as our monitoring sites, our monitoring equipment. We took 19 of those and we placed them around the Cowichan Valley, and people have access to that data. And this is where all the sites are right now. This is just a screenshot from December of 2017. So we've got sites out Honeymoon Bay, Lake Cowichan, River Bottom, and then from the north from Thetis Island all the way down to Shawnigan Lake. Do I have time to look at that? I think I do. Okay. So what I was going to do is just give you a really quick look at some of the information, and it was pretty interesting. We kind of expect to see a lot of variability across the region depending on what's going on. If somebody's open burning here, they're going to have an impact here, but not an impact 10 kilometers down the road, and vice versa. What was interesting, let me see if I can pull this up. Okay, where is it? Keith? Oh, right here. This is just, it doesn't come out that great. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, but so all this is that it's the stations down the left-hand side, and the top 3 stations are actually the most western stations. So that's Honeymoon Bay, Lake Cowichan, and River Bottom. Then I swung to the north to include Thetis Island and worked my way south all the way down to Cobble Hill. And the ones in the very bottom in light green, those are our monitoring stations, the ministry's monitoring stations. And all this is a calendar plot. So as we go through, I'm just going to scroll to the right here, and we put the stations in September, the dates along the top there. And as we moved through okay, let's see if I can make this work. Maybe it'll just let me go like this. I'm just going to try to do this quickly. Here we go. So as we move towards October, this mid-October, we start to pick up some reds and oranges. And what really interested me, instead of seeing this sort of spatial variability across the region, we saw that the entire valley was full of smoke. So it wasn't just one area. It wasn't just Cobble Hill. It wasn't just Lake Cowichan. It was all over the place. So very interesting results to see that the effect that open burning can have across the entire region. And we also saw, as we moved out of the open burning window, so into mid-November, things started to clean up there, but we still saw, there were some areas that showed, some differences in terms of impacts. But as we moved into December again, there was a period there where we had very stagnant conditions, and again, an air quality advisory was issued for the region based on our site in Duncan, and it was actually pretty representative of what was going on right across the valley. So I was kind of surprised there. I'll just leave that one for now. I'm almost done, I'm sorry. I thought you might be interested in looking at that. So I guess in summary, basically all the parameters that we measure there, again, PM 2.5 measurements are the ones that are the most important from an air quality and health perspective. We continue to see good air quality in the warm months and degraded air quality during the cold season. And we know that weather plays a large role in that. So if we get a really wet fall, which we did in 2016, where the rain just didn't stop through October, November, we see a bit of a scrubbing effect and some suppression of those numbers. We can see the opposite, really, really hot summers that we expect to see as a result of climate change to continue wildfire smoke impacts. And those have an effect on people. People are active in that smoke. We are now in compliance with the federal standards, which is good news. Still got some work to do. Let's keep that in mind. And we still see occasional exceedances of our provincial standards during the cold months. This is something that I think Shannon's just going to speak to.
Yeah, so just in summary from the health aspect, there's really no safe limit for PM 2.5. When we look at, we all breathe the air, any improvements that we can make in air quality, no matter how small, when you're looking at that pyramid of how people can be affected, will have some reduced health impacts, especially for vulnerable populations. So any improvements that we make, and Earl had mentioned some, are having positive health effects in our community. And the lower of levels of PM 2.5 that we can get to, the better health of the population we will have, especially for cardiovascular and respiratory effects, both in the short term and the long term. And as Earl was mentioning as well, we have the technology. We have ways to reduce particulate air pollution, specifically in the winter. There's things we can't do about what's happening in the summer, but as you can see, it's quite striking as you scroll across the months. We have a picture of what's happening with the air quality in our valley. We know it's affecting people's health, and there are things we can do to help reduce that.
And I guess lastly, the airshed protection strategy work that's been done here over the last few years, it is definitely the right tool for the job. It's something that we need to continue with, and it needs to continue to be resourced. I think that's important for people to recognize. And the reason for that is it's a very large geographic area. There's a lot of municipal partners across that area. There's a lot of different sources and things that people that we need to engage to make this happen. Everybody brings something to the table, and we need to work together and stay engaged. These are just a list of some of the things that we have been working on. And I'm just going to let Keith talk, I guess, about what's been going on in the CVRD. So any questions I can take right now, I guess, if you have any.
I'm just going to talk about, I've also sat on this committee, and Earl and I have been there for quite a few years. There has been a lot of things that, and I know Keith will speak to it too, but there has been a lot of things that have been happening, but I really believe that that 2-week period that we've had that we've opened it up for burning isn't really working. Do you have any thoughts about that? And your diagrams show the 2 weeks? Because I'm not convinced that people actually pull up the venting before they light up. And I still see people burning leaves and that type of stuff. So do you have any?
Yeah, that's a difficult one for sure. I mean, if it's something that the board wants to see happen, if you still want to allow people to open burn or use fire on the lands, dispose of organic waste in rural areas, then it's something it's going to generate smoke. Regardless of venting, it is going to generate smoke. So it all comes down to timing, so timing of the release period and then dryness of the material. So if people are going to leave their material over the winter months, then try to burn it in the spring without tarping it. Of course, it's going to be very wet material. You're going to try to light that up regardless of the time of day and the venting. You're going to generate a lot of smoke, and it's going to overwhelm the atmosphere's ability to disperse that. I guess the other one is around the number of people, the sheer number of people lighting up on certain days. That's a question that we always get. Okay, so if everybody holds off until that one magic venting day, so the one venting day comes along, then suddenly you've got 10,000 households all lighting their backyard fire. That's going to overwhelm the atmosphere's ability to disperse that smoke as well. So I think it's a combination of looking at other woody debris management options. So maybe it's curbside pickup that's targeted for the spring and summer for people that, they know when that's going to occur, so they can plan their gardening activities or whatever they need to do to get rid of that waste at those times. There's a lot of different things that can be looked at, but it's a difficult question for sure.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you. Great presentation, and I've got a sort of an anecdotal comment and then a bit of a more serious question. I have a purple air monitor a stone's throw from my house in Honeymoon Bay, and I sometimes sit and watch the three that fall into the screen, Honeymoon Bay, Town Lake Cowichan, and my friend Parker's place. And strangest thing yesterday, I was reading agendas and tracking this and just popping back and forth between the screens, and I noticed all of a sudden a spike. We're normally hovering down in under 10, and we were up to 50, 60, and
I noticed that too.
I literally, I walked outside and took a sniff, and someone was burning plastic in the community. So they're pretty sensitive.
Yeah.
It's kind of a neat thing. My question around, like, absolutely, we know that we're the principal sources of PM 2.5 are. It's the backyard burning. There's a lot around transportation. I'm just looking at the wood stove component. It's a quarter, let's say. And I get it. And I think that this regional district has looked at trying to provide reasonable alternatives, more efficient wood stove or heating devices. But this is a really important issue in the western part of the Cowichan Valley because a lot of people use wood heat. It's far more affordable, and I'll just give you a quick example. A dozen years ago, when I moved into the home that I'm in now, we converted from wood to a heat pump and electric air handler. My hydro bills at that point were about $150 a month. They're creeping into $400 a month range because of the two-tier hydro rates and the like. So this is a really important economic question. So if I can see us doing more of the work around getting more efficient devices in homes, but if we're going to look at eliminating that component of the pie, there's going to have to be alternative options for people in the lower economic scale.
Yep.
Got any suggestions, got any thoughts on that?
Another big one. I think it's, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't speak for Keith in the roundtable, but I think, in my view, as the province, we're not saying don't use wood heat. We're saying if you're going to use wood heat, use the best available technology you can, burn the cleanest that you possibly can. Make sure that the fuels that you're burning are appropriate. You're not burning plastics and contaminating your neighbors. You're using dry wood. I see that every day that I'm driving down the street. People have got big stacks of wood sitting out in the rain. They're out there splitting their wood in the rain, and they're bringing it in and throwing it in their wood stove. It's so inefficient. They're losing their heat value, and they're creating a lot of unnecessary smoke that pollutes the neighborhood. In terms of alternatives, I actually asked my counterpart in Victoria the other day. I said, with BC hydro rates going up, it's sending the wrong message. We're trying to get people to move to cleaner sources of heating their homes, and electricity is definitely a clean option in terms of PM emissions. But it's just it puts people it's out of reach for a lot of people. It didn't get much response on that. But it's definitely what we're trying to do through the Wood Stove Exchange program. We're recognize that a wood-to-wood exchange maybe isn't the right way to go, and maybe public money should be spent more on incentivizing people moving from wood to more cleaner heat sources, like whether it's natural gas, and then there's the whole climate change issue, or electricity. So it's a difficult question, but there are some things that can be looked at, and I think it really comes down to awareness is really big, and education is big, but it's the whole engagement thing, and keeping the community engaged. I think another issue that I've seen is that you may have a wood stove operator in a residence that's been there for 30 years, and he's great at burning. He knows how to use his stove. He watches his emissions. He's got his wood shed. He keeps everything dry. He does everything right, and it's great. He sells his home. A young couple moves in and goes, "Hey, great, a wood stove. I should use that to cut down on my energy bills." Doesn't do things right. So it comes back to that educational piece, and it's just this round, circular thing that keeps on happening once there's wood stoves in a community, just to keep people engaged on how to use those things correctly and try to minimize emissions. Sorry, long question, or long answer.
I'll just make a comment on that as well. I think, around the health effects and, physician visits, Ventolin dispensations, admissions to hospitals, all that carries a cost, quite a high cost. But I think in a lot of these issues, and air quality not being the only one, the costs are so separated, and some are borne by individuals and some are borne by the health system, that it's very difficult to tease out to get, okay, what the actual cost burden of this and how we could look collectively to actually maybe have, in the end, some decreased costs by putting things in place such as looking at, the cost of heating a home and how we can look at that collectively in the bigger picture of the finances.
Thank you. Director Stone.
Almost forgotten. Just a quick question. I noticed on the map, there's sensors distributed throughout the regional district, but none north of Chemainus. Is there a reason for that?
Actually, we just installed one in Ladysmith.
Oh, okay.
So it just came online 2 weeks ago.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Okay, moving on now to, I have Director Jackson, Lefebvre, and Walker.
Thank you. I'm finding this really very interesting. I don't know if you would know the answer or maybe the staff would know the answer. So if somebody's doing a small renovation or taking down an old fence or something, rather than taking it out to the backyard and burning it, what are the options here in the CVRD? Maybe through you to the staff, or if you're not aware of the answer.
Tasif could help us with that.
Excellent.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for the question. We have the public facilities, obviously, and the private facilities. A lot of C&D ends up in the, excuse me, at the private facilities, such as one in Nanaimo and Fisher Road in the south.
And it's free.
It's free.
Some materials is free, so if it's a clean wood, it's free. If it's not, if it's a painted wood, that's more of a garbage side of it.
Okay, so, and does Bing's have that as well?
Bing's accept the oil, both kind of wood, both clean and the contaminated wood. We accept that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Director Lefebvre.
Thank you. Just very quickly to Director Morrison, the heat pump is actually very efficient, the electric heat pump. It really needs to be combined with insulation, doors and windows. You can heat a house very efficiently, very economically, but if you have no insulation in the walls, so we should have a program, the province should have a program that supports that entire picture, and you will actually have people heating their homes very efficiently at very low cost to their electrical bill. Thank you.
Director Walker.
Unless I missed something, I believe I heard you lump wood stoves and open burning together. Can you tell me sort of what percentage is wood stoves and what percentage of the emissions would come from open burning? Like, I have trouble. They're two separate items to me.
Yes.
And
Yeah, so the emissions inventory.
Which is the bigger issue
Yeah.
and which is the bigger problem?
I guess, so from the emissions inventory perspective, what they did is they looked at the entire region. So I can bring that chart back up if you like, but
Or
I think
can you
open.
measure the difference? Smoke is smoke, I guess.
You can measure the difference to some degree, but not with the instrumentation that we have. It's really around, more around what's going on in close to people. And for the most part, forestry burning isn't going to be occurring right in close and tight to communities. It's generally more remote, but that's included in that burning category. We did break that down further within the burning category in terms of backyard burning, what the emission, that contribution was to the total forestry burns and land clearing burns. So that has been broken down in the inventory report. So I don't have that information off the top of my head, but it is there. But in terms of that piece of pie, I think it was, what was that, 45% of the total emissions were open burning and 30% were from wood stoves. But if we think about I guess where those occur, if all those wood stove emissions, well, the majority of those wood stove emissions are right where people live. Out of that open burning pie, the backyard burning piece, if you take that out, that's next to where people are. Development burning is generally where people are. And those are things that we really want to focus on for people's health.
And I guess if I could continue, I guess it would depend on the time of the year. It would seem to me that December, January, and February, there isn't much open burning. So it would be, and that's a season you would be doing more wood stove burning, correct?
That's generally what we see. Those are the patterns that we typically see are. So the Ministry of Forests has a burn ban in place throughout the summertime. And they generally will lift that sort of mid-September, early October. And then that's generally when we see the hazard abatement burning in the forestry sector take place. So sometime between mid-September and mid-November, forestry burns generally take place and they're done. Development burns, most people try to, the same thing. As soon as that window is open, they try to get stuff done. And then backyard burning, I think right now it's regulated by the CVRD in many places, and the window doesn't begin until October 15th and until November 15th. But you're right, the majority of the emissions or the majority of the impacts after about the end of November are from residential wood stoves.
Thank you.
Okay, I actually have two more speakers, and I'd like to remind everyone that Keith still needs to present, and 11:45 today, we need to be out, but I do have Director Marsh. Okay, so I'd like to call on Keith to finish see all the good work CVRD's been doing.
So thank you, Dr. Waters and Mr. Plain, for providing that strong and helpful comprehensive review of why we do need to focus on this contaminant PM 2.5, as well as providing some of those high-level policy actions that are already underway. What I'm going to do over the next few minutes is really talk a little bit more about the local solutions that and so we continue to be focused on those two top-level goals. Throughout the region, there are many participants who have been active, and I won't get into all of the details of the various participants today. I'll focus mainly on what the CVRD has been doing, but just to highlight a couple examples, including North Cowichan's fire protection bylaw update, but also work, for example, by Health Canada. So we've been talking about wood-burning appliances. They've released a series of videos on wood-burning appliances, and so how to burn better with your wood-burning appliance. And so we're hoping that we can support a more complete release of those videos so that it can get into local hands, and so folks can see how they can burn better, essentially. And so ultimately, I'm going to provide a very brief overview of some of the highlights, and I'll drill down into a couple key ones as well. But when we think about this important category of open burning, as Earl mentioned, it makes up about 50% of our emissions inventory for the region. A couple activities that have been key throughout 2017 include now having Saltaire included in the backyard burning bylaw, and so that portion of Area G, through discussions and workshops with Area G, that piece is now included in the scope of the backyard burning bylaw. We're working on a burning bylaw matrix, which supports the Recycling and Waste Division review of the burning bylaws in our region, and I'll share a little bit more detail on that in a moment. And another piece that supports overall emissions burning, open burning emissions reduction, is a study that's in progress, one that we received funding for from the province, and so we're looking forward to that being able to inform the development of solutions to reduce emissions from open burning. On the front of the wood stove exchange program, as has been reflected already, there is this need and already a little bit of action underway to refocus that program on some of the alternative heat sources. A little bit more on that as well. And then Earl has already talked about this neighborhood PM 2.5 sensor network. And so to add to what Earl has mentioned, that has also been a collaborative with our stewardship community to get those up and running. And so we acknowledge the various stewards and school district folks who have helped us install those. On the front of collaboration, some of you may have been aware that we were voted the Clean Air Champion for 2017 by the BC Lung Association. And so there's an article in the 2017 State of the Air Report for folks who want a bit more information on that. And it highlights the airshed protection strategy as one of the strengths in our region, as well as the roundtable that has been formed, and essentially a broad suite of actions that include both the public outreach, but also the regulatory tools that are needed. On the front of the roundtable, we've had that support from CVRD funding for facilitation of the roundtable by our Cowichan Communities Health Network for 2017. Going forward, the MOE has provided funding to continue that facilitation through 2018 and probably into a little bit of 2019. And so we're pleased about that to enable that to continue. And also a piece that was we've received funding for was this development of a airshed communications roadmap, and I'll share a little bit more on that with you. That funding came through from Plan H to be able to essentially fund our co-op student, Taylor Alexander, who did a tremendous amount of work to gather input into that particular roadmap. So on that note of the wood stove exchange program, so what we wanted to share with folks is essentially this beginning of a spatial distribution of where we see the wood stove exchanges happening. So they are happening throughout the region. There is more work to be done here in terms of adding previous exchanges prior to 2014, which we're working on, as well as adding other information around where we see our communities in terms of the population density and where we need to do more work to focus and be more targeted about those exchanges. And so, and going beyond exchanges, where we actually need to think about more of the replacement to those alternate forms of heating. And so, so with that, the Recycling and Waste Division and team members have been embarking on a series of outreach initiatives, including some development of materials. And so, sharing with you a poster that was developed by team members in that division. And what you'll see in that poster is a highlighting of this shift, this refocusing on more of these alternative forms of heating. So the replacement, the rebate for an exchange of an older wood burning appliance to a newer one is currently staying the same. But what we're now seeing in 2018 is that there'll be an increase to a higher amount for alternate forms of heating like heat pumps or pellet stoves or propane stoves. And so to provide that additional incentive for folks to move to that cleaner source. And so this is one shift in that direction. By no means is it the only tool that may ultimately get us to where we need to be for reducing emissions from this source, but it can help, and we'll continue to monitor the progress of how that plays out, and how this program can continue to be refined over time. And so, on the note of the regulations, the open burning regulations are one of the key tools for reducing emissions from that source. And so, what was early on identified through the open burning working group of the Airshed Protection Roundtable was this need to understand what the various bylaws were. And so before we looked at how we can make them perhaps more consistent and be able to identify the gaps. And so with that, we developed a open burning bylaw matrix, and we appreciate the input from all of the various participants that have a regulation to be able to build this matrix. But essentially, there's a large number of parameters to look at, lots of different features. And so in the matrix that's attached to the staff report, folks can have a look at what the various parameters are and how those features are different. And so there's detail provided on that. What we've done for today is provide a high-level summary really of one of the key features, which is the type of burning ban that is in place. And so whether it is a partial ban, as in there's a window for folks to burn within, or perhaps a permitting process, whether there is a more complete ban like we do see in some of our jurisdictions, or whether there isn't one specified at this time. And so when we went through this process, what we quickly realized is that no two bylaws are the same in our region. And so we do also have this number of bylaws. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But there's also the open burning smoke control regulation at the provincial level for those larger machine pile burns, so those category 3 burns. And so there are a number of tools for folks to be familiar with. How can we make that more consistent so that folks can comply and understand the rules, but also provide that enforcement that is needed? And so we're looking forward to that work going forward and informing the development of a review of the open burning bylaws that we have. We have 2 burning bylaws, and be able to provide essentially look at the gaps and understand where can we have more consistency. And so one other piece here to share with you is the open burning communications and engagement roadmap. And again, acknowledging the contributions of our funder for that, Plan H, as well as the good work of a co-op student to be able to gather input from various participants. And so sharing with you the roadmap in a placemat format that was developed. And essentially the placemat has these high-level goals of fostering behavior change. So how can we foster behavior change to either burn less or burn not at all, and also build community champions that can ultimately spread the word and help us achieve that behavior change. Ultimately, working towards this goal of reducing PM 2.5 and improving health within our community. So, there's a copy of that electronically. There's more copies printed. So if directors are interested in having a copy to share, we encourage folks to reach out to us, and we can share those. And finally, Earl mentioned a bit about the Purple Air Sensor Network, and you may have seen recently that we have really coordinated the release of that network along with a public outreach campaign, which included some key messages around what some of the health impacts are of wood smoke. And so we developed some postcards. There are postcards available for pickup at our front counter here on the 2nd floor, as well as a brief summary of what the problem is. A second postcard around what folks can do to reduce emissions and the different types of open burning that we have, and a third piece around the sensor network and where folks can go to understand information about local air quality conditions. And so before I finish off, wanted to share with you briefly, because one of the challenges that folks, including directors, have come forward with is this idea that there are information sources in a variety of places. So for example, you have to go to one place for venting information, another place for provincial air quality data, another place for purple air data. And so we're working with our GIS group to look at how we can integrate some of that information. And so this is really just a sample test run at the moment, and we're going to continue to add to this, but it is essentially a look at how we can, and for whatever reason that hasn't quite refreshed on there. Maybe it just takes some time here, but so it's actually stuck on the PowerPoint. We'll shrink the PowerPoint. So there we go. So what we've been working on here is an opportunity to essentially plot out the various provincial sensors as well as the local purple air sensors, and as well as have an easy to access form for the venting information. So to give folks an idea, the relationship between those two, as well as potentially add other information such as smoke forecasts that the province releases, as well as other relevant data sets like wildfires of note, and essentially have that opportunity for folks to quickly see what's going on in their neighborhood. And there's also an opportunity here to add additional monitoring to areas that are currently noted as gaps. And so we look forward to feedback from directors and folks within the community on that. That can help inform where we do need to fill some of those gaps. And so these sensors are the lower cost ones, these purple air sensors. So the provincial sensors are noted here with the circles, but adding the additional sensors, which are shaped as squares here, we're looking forward to gathering that information so we can expand the monitoring capabilities. And so to finalize, we do want to come back to what the purpose of this report was, which was to seek direction for 2019 work planning, essentially where we can ultimately increase our communication efforts where needed, or programming to ensure we have the right level of group facilitation, and again, be able to have some additional air quality monitoring in those communities that need that. And so thank you for the opportunity to share with you, and we look forward to any comments and questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Keith. And I do sit on the roundtable as well. I just have a brief list. Having asthmatic people in your family kind of highlights this a little bit more. And I wondered about the construction waste. I go to and they are still burning, so the construction waste, they are still burning. So I'm not sure if those little postcards or whatever, or when people come out for permits for their housing, if that's not one of them, because I'm surprised that I see that. They did start in our community with dumpsters, and now they're slowly moving back into the burning. And there is a webinar coming up as well. The workshops for the wood, like you're saying, when people move into homes that have wood stoves, if you've moved here from Calgary or somewhere else where you're not familiar with that, I believe we have had workshops here. I'm not sure how well attended they were. In Cowichan Bay, we have a group that is called Ship Watch. So they are watching the freighters that anchor in the bay for quite some time, and there's a lot of admissions that come from the freighters as well. And someone is watching the purple air monitor and the freighters, and sort of collating that this could be, that's also stopping the air too. So that is just something that I just wanted to share with you. And also School District 79, I was working with Elizabeth, and working towards idle-free in schoolyards. When I drop off my grandchildren, there's actually vehicles, people constantly, I know it's idle-free BC, but you have to remind them. So it's better that the school, because I've tapped on windows and it hasn't been very fun. And land clearing bylaw, we did really well on that. So if you notice that there's piles that are piling up in your community, then you should either mention it to enforcement or not. And then also we just had, we are the sole jurisdiction of land use, and we just had another drive-through restaurant go in that was approved in a community. So I think that we should be aware that's another dimension to this. And I really, your advertising is great. So I really like the idea when we say the make soil, not smoke, different things like that. And it would be great if CVRD, if there's some kind of a chipper program, because I hear from seniors, I don't have a truck, I can't take away mine. I'm used to burning, I've always burnt, So if there was, I know the Okanagan has done that, and it's a regional district as well. So that's my list, and I'm going to move on to Director Morrison and then Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at the wood stove replacement rebate program, I have to say I'm a little disappointed. In my community, we've got a fairly high number of rental properties and because the rents are a little cheaper and we've got people that are more economically challenged living in the community. And we tried to address this a number of years ago with what I could only describe as I guess, a very low income rebate program. And we didn't get there by reducing what the rebate could have been. It just made it out of reach for people that are going to get their own wood because that's the only way they can heat their home. And if we're going to ask people to pay more than $300 or $400 towards new stove and equipment, new appliances, it's just not going to happen. And with, you know, central or a district heating program, that's not going to happen. We know that our natural gas suppliers are not running gas lines out to the Cowichan Lake area. I just look at this program and going to the different source of heating and the increased rebate for that. We're still going to have uncertified stoves cranking out the PM 2.5s, and they just won't come into the tent. They won't participate in reducing PM 2.5s. So is there any consideration for targeting some of that? Because just looking at, I just did a quick calculation. We go from an uncertified stove to an EPA certified stove, we reduce PM 2.5 by 70%. So are we going to look at those possibilities?
So thank you. Through the chair to Director Morrison, I'll unpack some of that and welcome commentary from the province, from Earl, or from our Recycling and Waste Division as well, from Tosif. Essentially, that speaks to the need for some of the neighborhood-specific solutions that can be developed. So with that mapping that we've started to undertake to understand where have the exchanges already happened, and where do we need to have more specific targeting, as well as the type of replacement. And so I know both from the provincial standpoint, at least from what we've been, the early discussions around additional funding and changes. So that program is something that does continue to get refined over time. Each year there's opportunities for changes, and so we're looking forward to potential discussions with the province that could perhaps enhance that program on either front, whether it's a replacement or whether it's an upgrade to a newer stove, as well as being able to, again, understand what are the energy requirements and needs from our community. So if others would like to respond, I think I invite them to do so, but thank you for the question, and it is something we need to continue to focus on.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the presenters. I'm glad that you brought this up. It's obvious that it is something that we need to continue to look at. And I could see that in Shawnigan, we're kind of lacking in the bylaw department. And I've felt that as the director. I've gotten many emails. I'm quite connected with the families in the community, so there'll be open burning, and I'll suddenly get a bunch of emails of parents panicking. And it also seems like maybe bylaw doesn't have the proper tools because it seems to be the same culprits every year. So the education piece is not necessarily getting through. I like the use of the child with the ventilator. I've seen that before. That's quite effective. But again, I'm not sure that it's getting to the right people. So looking at it, more of perhaps we can look at it a little bit differently. Are we getting to the people instead of just handing out postcards that happen to be at the community center? Those are the people already who are concerned. Another component that I'm wondering that is an area that we never seem to talk about, and I know it's an issue in Shawnigan, is the fire department. They'll get called out and they refuse to participate because their mandate is simply about safety. So the burning is being done safely, so they're not stepping in. So are we going around talking to fire departments and trying to work that angle as well?
So through the chair to Director Acton, again, excellent questions, and I'll start with the public outreach piece, which and I'll come back to some of the comments that Dr. Waters made early on. Is it is indeed a problem that affects many demographics. So it affects the young, but also our elderly, as well as folks with that are exposed through respiratory illnesses, and so. We do need to have communication that reaches that broad range of folks. And so at the same time, we need to have an understanding of how well that communication is working. So not only developing metrics around how we're improving on a PM 2.5 basis, but how well folks are understanding these messages. And so that's something that the various working groups of the roundtable have continued to wrestle with, but we can take more deliberate action, and particularly as we have the ability to have hopefully more support and more resourcing and capability going forward. And on the note of regulatory consistency and enforcement, one of the pieces that's in play with the open burning working group is this review of the open burning bylaws, and so folks from with that regulatory role are invited to participate and be able to provide the input in terms of what are the criteria of their bylaw, but also to talk about what some of the challenges are. And so we've been working with those folks from the fire departments, as well as folks from our municipal partners around how we can make that more consistent and ultimately improve enforcement and compliance. And so that will continue to be part of the review process, as I understand it, that there'll be an opportunity for that collaboration and exchange with the various regulators.
Thank you. I have Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Keith, or Mr. Lawrence. I have a couple of questions. You've sent us the link to the provincial potential changes, the opening burning smoke control regulation. I'm not going to be able to participate because of other meetings. Will you be giving the board an update on what those changes are at some point?
So through the chair to Director Marsh, so that those webinars, just for some additional background for folks, they're being hosted by the Ministry of Environment, and ultimately there'll be an opportunity for input throughout the webinars, but also there's various other channels that are available. Okay. And once that input is summarized by those folks who are working on that, there could well be an opportunity to come back and provide an update. Again, some of the folks from the province could speak to more of the details around their timeline for doing all of that. But it is one key component of the regulatory framework. And we're fortunate to have provincial representation at the roundtable to continue to update us on how that process unfolds. And so certainly there's various opportunities to stay updated, and we look forward to being able to provide those updates to the board as they become available.
Follow-up, Director Marsh?
Yeah, I'm also wondering, this will show my ignorance, but the new provincial energy step code, does it address wood stoves as a source of heat, or is it merely that the place, like, would it address at the highest step you wouldn't be allowed to have a wood stove? Or do you know? That might be an unfair question to you.
I'll ask if other folks, maybe, I don't know if Earl has any additional information on that, but
it'd be interesting to know, because if it did, that might be one way we could phase it out if we adopted that code.
So I'll ask if Ms. Miller can respond to that.
Potentially, yeah.
The step code allows local governments to utilize a series of steps as incentives to whole house development and energy efficiency. And the top tier is a passive house, which wouldn't have any form of heat input to it.
So it doesn't address this forum?
Well, you wouldn't have a wood stove at that level, so
You would?
you would not.
You would not? Okay. So that's a potential avenue down the road, right? So I just had one more, if I could. I was at the Renewable Cities Forum last year in May with one of our engineering people, and they were talking about disruptive technologies and microgrids. And you were mentioning, I wasn't sure, it's so long ago that I was there, are microgrids something that have to happen in a new development, or could that be an incentive for a neighborhood to get off wood, say one of these neighborhoods where there's a lot of burning, if they could collectively form a microgrid? Do you know?
Well, certainly, if, through the chair to Director Marsh, if a community wanted to do that, that's something that they could come together. It would need some collaboration with key partners. BC Hydro comes to mind immediately, as well as the local government, if it's within the municipality or within an electoral area, and would need some thorough exploration. But there's definitely opportunities for the exploration of alternative heating sources and options, and so yeah, at this point, that's something that could definitely be explored. But
So, if I may, just one more?
Follow-up?
Yes, please, thank you. You mentioned that you had a student working on the airshed. Is that something that a co-op student could work on to get the data, to have the business case for that, for the region?
it is something that a co-op student could explore. At this point, if there was specific direction to do that, then that could be explored.
Okay, thank you.
I'd also like to let everyone know there is an amazing passive house that they're working on in North Cowichan, and there's tours coming up soon, so I'm not sure if you're aware of that. So it's off of Knipson Road. So it'd be great for us to have a look at that as well. So Director Stone.
I just wanted to pick up on your comment about, the chipper or maybe free seasonal pickup of yard waste. Talking to our neighbors, a lot of them have bigger pieces of property and no vehicles that can either haul it. And it's a cost thing, as Director Morrison mentioned as well. A lot of our neighbors burn wood, and it's because the cost of alternatives exceeds what they can afford. So, I think it's something that deserves looking into, especially around the backyard burning. Just reading a few things online here too, just the last thing, there's a lot of oil heat still around as well, and in some cases, and compared to electric, if you haven't got your house all done up, it still is cheaper. Does oil heat contribute significantly to PM 2.5? Because when I see the oil furnaces, I can smell it in the air and I can see it in the neighborhood. It's just the chimneys look just as bad as the wood stoves.
So through the chair to Director Stone, the oil furnaces do have a contribution to PM 2.5. It is lower than the wood burning appliances, but it would be higher than, say, the natural gas heating form. What the number is exactly, or where it would be in relation to those more specifically, one would have to look at the specific numbers. But if there's anything to add to that, Earl, but it would be in that neighborhood of between those two types of heating forms. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up. So, I think that we should look at how we address backyard burning, because I think that's the most significant source, looking at the charts. Obviously, we've got the seasonal things about wood heat. So I think Director Morrison and the chair are both on the 2 points. One is, until we address the affordability issue, it's going to be challenging for a lot of people to get off of wood, especially, I did replace our insert, but it was nearly $4,000, and that's just for when we want to have a nice little fire. So if somebody's going to heat that way, it's still a significant expense, and $600 or $550 or $300 and something dollars is probably not going to be enough to get those people to move to a better wood burning appliance. And then, we do, at least municipally, that spring cleanup. If we added a chipper to that route, maybe that's an option to cut down on the backyard burning, because I know in our neighborhood, that was the same story. And I ended up paying $200 to have somebody with a truck come to our property, and I still have 2 haystack-sized piles of branches and debris that still have to go. And I don't want to burn them, but I'm not sure I can afford an alternative.
I think that also the manufacturer has the wood stoves to, new wood stoves, I believe the manufacturer has another rebate. It's actually a fair chunk of change. I bought mine just after the rebates came through, but Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I really appreciate the update. I appreciate that it's work that's done at a roundtable. I am getting a little bit frustrated though, because I don't think the bylaw that we have for our rural areas is working. And so I'm wondering when your open burning working group is going to come up with a proposed bylaw. I'm not sure that waiting for harmonization at this point is a good idea. I mean, I think harmonization is a good goal, but maybe we should be looking at addressing for the electoral areas a better bylaw.
So through the chair to Director Nicholson, the burning bylaw review process is something that our manager of recycling and waste could speak more to. Again, it is one tool in our box for addressing the open burning. It needs to go alongside that public outreach and education programming as well to be effective. But in terms of how that may unfold, I'll invite our manager of recycling and waste to share a bit on that as well.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you for the question. So we are looking into burning bylaw, and obviously we're also looking at the potential opportunity of amalgamating land clearing and burning bylaw together. So obviously we're gathering the information. So Keith just spoke about the gathering information in terms of gap analysis. That was the first step that we did. It wouldn't make sense. So for example, if you're looking at the windows, and the windows are different within the regional district. The rules are different within this. So air quality not necessarily has any boundaries within the regional district or beyond. So we're looking at gathering the data. I think in terms of the resources and the priorities, obviously we're working on solid waste management plan. 2570 is another one, and then this one is also be looked at the same time. So it's in the queue, but we're certainly looking into it. With your permission, Madam Chair, I'd also want to comment on the wood chipper, and I think that's a very logical comment as well. As part of the solid waste management plan, and from technical side of it, we were promoting that. I think it'll depend on the PAC committee, how they look at it, and the public input from that angle. But we are putting that as a comment in there.
Great. Good. Thank you. I have one more speaker, Director Jackson.
Thank you very much. When Director Marsh said we should be starting to work towards phasing out wood stoves, there's a whole bunch of people in this province that just got a really bad headache and didn't know why. It's almost a class issue. It's an economic issue. There's no way that my daughter, for instance, could afford a heat pump. There's no way a lot of people in this area could afford a heat pump. And in the northern areas of the province, they depend not only on wood, but diesel. So, what I would like to see is like whether a provincial or federal program where that people who would like to get off wood stoves would be able to have some kind of low-cost federal or provincial loan so that they would be able to buy the $4,000 insert or the whatever a heat pump costs, which I don't even know what it is, over a period of time that would just be added to their hydro bill or something like that, or some other way. But just to state that, we want this region to work towards having no wood stoves at all. It's a dream for the future, but I believe it's premature.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
If I may, through the chair to Director Jackson, those comments are important, and it speaks to the need for exploring energy resiliency within our communities, as well as developing the synergies with our climate adaptation planning. And so to continue to have those folks from those various groups continue to be part of the processes that we have. to continue to look for those solutions. And those comments can help inform our discussions with the province that we have around something like the wood stove replacement program. But that's, again, one tool and one example. And so it's helpful. And when I say we, it's working with our recycling and waste division and others within the roundtable to explore how we can move forward with that identifying of solutions, keeping in mind the needs for the energy resilience goals that may be at play as well. So thank you.
And just one thing that didn't come up, I know at Cowichan Bay 70% is ALR land and farmers, and I'd like to see that we have a provincial person here that maybe that could be a little bit more restrictive on the burning that they do, and I'm not too sure that they're always following the venting as well. So I know we have no jurisdiction over that, but that's another huge component in this story. Thank you. Thank you very much, Earl, Dr. Waters, Keith, and Tosif. Moving on now. Yes, that's really good. Moving on now to R2, we have a report from the Manager of Parks and Trails, Parks and Trails Volunteer Policy.
Madam Chair, we have the report from the Manager of Parks and Trails, and the recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the Parks and Trails Volunteer Policy as Attachment A to the Parks and Trails Volunteer Policy Staff Report to the April 25th, 2018 Regional Services Committee meeting be approved.
Okay, I had a mover. Is there a seconder? Seconder? Is there any discussion on this? Director Nicholson.
I am disappointed in this redraft of, or the revised draft of the volunteer policy. I thought we had been, I guess we had not been clear enough in the review comments from the planning commissions, but the parks commissions. But I heard fairly clearly from both the meetings that I attended to that there was sort of a lack of appreciation or comfort with the approach in general, which was noted in our report on the general overall feedback. But I guess my perspective is that the tone of this policy is wrong. And what we're talking about here in this policy is volunteer management versus volunteer collaboration. And until we get to a point where we appreciate our community and are prepared to work with them, to build relationships as opposed to manage relationships, we are getting it wrong. And I really think this is a good example of a wrong-headed policy. And a lot of it has to do with the way it's written and the tone. There is nothing in this policy that talks about what volunteers can expect from the CVRD, what kind of timeliness and access to support they can expect. This is a one-way thing, and I really cannot support it as it's written.
Director Acton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess first I'd like to understand how are we critiquing, like I have some feedback on what was written. Should we be delivering that? Like, is that how detailed this discussion is going to get? So I agree that the tone is
This
a little off.
recommendation has been moved and seconded, so the recommendation in front of you.
As it stands now, I would not approve it, but I could highlight why. The tone, I agree, is not welcoming volunteers. Just this past weekend, we had a garbage cleanup for Earth Day, and just the fact of putting 16-year-olds as the benchmark, it should be much younger, including my 8-year-old participated and cleaned up garbage along the tracks. And a whole group of kids that were 12 and that age, they did an amazing job. And then also, just the fact that you need your parent there to sign for you, perhaps there's some other way to do it. I know that there were actually my son's friends, two showed up on their bicycles. They know what's going on, they just show up. They needed an adult to sign for them, so I signed for them. And then so that would not be allowed under this case. And, you know, a 14-year-old kid is almost an adult when it comes to volunteering, and this gives them the experience. I think we're limiting. So we're not encouraging volunteering with this policy as it is right now. It's a little bit better than it was before. Also, it doesn't mention that the directors have the ability to run a volunteer session, so it's not making it accessible. It's actually putting up roadblocks and making it difficult and making it more timely than it has to be, or more the time longer. And I don't like the wording about volunteers will not be used to work that would normally require the employment of a paid public sector employee, because that could apply to just about anything. And you could have an artist who's donating a rock wall, or the possibilities are endless. I really don't like that wording. The orientation piece, so now you're adding another step that people have to come to. People want to just sign up and show up for their 2-hour duty, and we got hundreds of people this weekend, collected 2,000 pounds of garbage, and that's how it has to be done. You just show up, you sign a waiver. If there's any kind of instruction, it has to be minimal and encouraging. And again, I do agree what Director Nicholson is saying around some kind of an agreement. How is it good for both people? How is this relationship going to benefit both parties? And how are we going to work together? And so I would like to see this revised. Perhaps we need to actually come together more in a workshop setting where we can really hash it out and convey our feelings on this. Thank you.
Director Jackson?
I'd like a motion to refer this back to staff or a subcommittee. Can somebody give me some
Motion to refer?
A motion to refer, because obviously this isn't talking about a relationship here, and it's more like a contract, and that's not what I'm hearing that people want. So a motion to refer back to fill in a blank, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Crothers.
Clearly, there is a disconnect between the expectations of the committee and what's been provided in terms of a policy. It will not be good enough to send it back to staff. I'm going to need to have your input into this, and whether the board chooses to establish a select committee to potentially review this and provide input. Editing and wordsmithing a policy like this in a committee or board meeting is not productive. So I'm going to leave that to the committee, but I'm going to request some support from this committee, because for staff to get it back, you know, there's obviously very different views and thoughts and concerns about this policy. And so maybe what you do is refer it back to staff for us to give you a recommendation on how to best approach it, rather than do that on the fly today. And we'll come back and report back to you on a potential process to do that.
Okay, that's the motion. It's been moved and seconded to refer back. Is there any discussion on the referral? I'm going to call the question on the referral. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moving on. Oh, actually, we were going to have a break. So could we have a 10-minute break? 10. We've got lots of work to do, so 10 minutes. We're missing just a few directors here, but our 10 minutes is in the staff room here. Okay, welcome back. We're moving on now to R3.
Thanks, Madam Chair. R3 is a report from the CAO regarding the proposed drinking water and watershed protection service. And before we consider the recommendation that is there is a correction needed to the bylaw. It revolves around the property value tax amount, and Mr. Kieber is going to explain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The bylaw is written in such a way that it determines the maximum requisition that can be raised for the service. And these bylaws are written in such a way that the maximum is the greater of, and in this case, 1.4 million and a tax rate. When these bylaws are initiated, the rate equates to the same dollar figure. However, the way it's written now, that rate does not equate to the 1.4 million, so the rate actually needs to be changed. The rate that was in there is to take off of what the cost implications are to residential homeowners over a $100,000 property. The rate that determines the maximum requisition should be 0.084096. And that rate is then applied to all classifications, not just residential. 0.084096.
So, Madam Chair, that would require a motion, and I have a recommendation on that. That draft bylaw number 4202 be amended by replacing the property value tax amount of 0.00706 per thousand with 0.084096 per 100,000 per 1,000.
That has been moved and seconded. So on the amendment, do you want to speak to the amendment? Director Dory?
Yes, so am I reading it correctly that it's actually going up by $1 per 100,000? No? What is it, how does it translate?
All that means is, how does it translate?
I'm not talking about the 1.4 million, I'm talking about the rate.
The rate. So the rate that was in there was wrong. It didn't equate to 1.4 million. The new rate equates to 1.4 million.
So it is, actually, the rate is going up, but the sum is not going up.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just correcting that mistake.
I understand, but so it's going up by like $1.
The rate that was used
$1.35 or
was the
$1.25?
cost per 100,000 for a residential home.
Yeah.
Per thousand.
It wasn't a rate. It was incorrectly put in this bylaw. So the correct rate is 0.0840.
So what I'm asking, is the rate a higher rate now than before?
It's the same rate that was used, that should have been there for 1.4, so there was an error. So it's a higher number, yes,
Yeah.
than what was in the bylaw.
But it also means that taxpayers will have to pay more.
No, it does not mean that. That's what I tried to say. The cost per 100,000 was correct at $7.06, and that is still the same. For a residential property. That does not change. That was correct and has always been correct. That rate, that was put into a rate and put into the bylaw, but that's not how you come up with the maximum rate.
I'm still not quite understanding it. I'm thinking that if you had a $500,000 home at $7.06 per 100,000, you're looking at $35 and something. When you go to the other rate, if you got a $500,000 home, you're going to be paying more. You're going to be paying 5 times 840 or whatever it is.
That assumption is not correct.
Excuse me, could I interrupt?
Just a second, Director Dory's finished now.
What actually?
Director,
So if I may, it's still $7.06 per 100,000 home. That is not, that number has not changed. That's for a residential home. The rate that should be in the bylaw is the rate that applies to all classifications, farm, forest, business, commercial, industry. That's the rate that should be in the bylaw. The number that was been given is always the cost per 100,000, and that number was put into the bylaw. So that, if that rate was in there, the maximum requisition would be about $120,000. You want 1.4 million.
Director Kuhn.
Actually, I was the one that discovered that mistake. And it's actually a very simple one, and it's the decimal point had been moved too far to the left by 1 digit. And then there was a slight adjustment after that. And that's all there was. It was just a mistake. It should have been further to the right, the decimal point, then it would have made sense. And I saw that right away. I looked at this bylaw and I knew it couldn't add up. And so that's it.
Director Jackson.
As usual, while I applaud the whole idea, and I think it should be done, we're starting way too high up, and there's no plan, and so I won't be voting for it. So if it's 7.06 residential, what is it for industrial and commercial, whatever the multiple is? So if, say if in Duncan it's 3 times, they'll be paying $21.18 per 100,000, and if in North Cowichan, if it was industrial, they would be paying whatever the multiple is.
Mr. Kieber.
So, Madam Chair, so for regional services that are adopted by the CVRD, the rate for businesses and industries do not take on the rate that the municipalities have for their commercial industry. They take on a regional district rate, and that rate is determined by the provincial government. It's all multiples of the residential class of the rate. And in this particular case, the residential is $7.06. So business, as an example, is 2.45 times that. Not quite 2.5 times. Industry, farms, they're all slightly different, and that has been, those rates have been established by the provincial government back in '67, and they have not changed.
My concern is, like I said, I think we're starting way too high. And I think that while I believe that we should be doing something, what people are going to do when they see the referendum, their eyes are going to pop out of their heads and they're just going to vote no. So what we're doing is we're cutting off our nose to spite our faces here by not starting at some reasonable level and having at least some kind of tentative plan in place. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Director Kuhn and then Director Stone.
Yeah, I handed out a sheet to the directors, and if you could have a look at that, please. The bylaw that we're proposing is requires a requisition.
Can I just hold
Point
it
of
there
order?
for a sec? This, the motion on the floor, I was just corrected,
Yes.
thank you,
Okay.
that it is about the amendment. So it's about
right.
correcting this, the problem we have on our current motion on the floor right now. So we
Okay,
can
I'll
talk
speak
about
later
that
then,
later,
that's
but
fine.
this is just on the amendment.
Thank you.
Director Acton on the amendment?
I just have a question on the amendment. How does it make it harder for the public later to research it or how will it be? I guess, is it going to cause any hindrance when somebody looks up the bylaw? Then do you have to go find the amendment, or does it just change it automatically for everything so that this doesn't become problematic down the road?
Mr. Barry.
Madam Chair, I'll try and answer that. What we're doing right now is we're just correcting, so the amended bylaw on this agenda will be what it should have been if we had caught it last week.
It won't show up as an amendment.
Well, it will in the minutes of this
Yeah, but
meeting,
that's
but
it.
if you choose to move forward later, the bylaw as it should have been written last week will appear on the board agenda.
Okay.
But it's really important that we correct something that we would have corrected at the staff level. Then you can continue the discussion after that, because then you have the proper worded bylaw in front of you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so on the amendment, I'm seeing no more hands. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Now we're going to go to Director Day, but I think Director Kuhn, and Director Day. And then
Okay.
Director Stone. Oh, Stone and then Day, sorry.
Stone Day. Back to that sheet that I was talking about. The bylaw that we're proposing requires a requisition of 1.4 million. I showed the breakdown as to how the money is supposed to be spent. And you'll notice that I put X's on 4 items there. And I had a discussion with the Regional District of Nanaimo to compare with their water protection program. And I came to the conclusion that the 4 items that are X'd on there are not paid or are not considered by the Regional District of Nanaimo. So even if we take these 4 out, we're still sitting at $800,000, and yet Nanaimo is only spending $400,000, which leaves me with an awkward feeling, especially if you consider that our population is a little over half of what the Regional District of Nanaimo has. So I just don't understand why we spend so much money when there is basically a template by the Regional District of Nanaimo. All we have to do is follow them. And there's been some connotation that, well, whoever doesn't, is not in favor of this bylaw or of this redoing of our water program doesn't care about water. That's all nonsense. Nobody can tell me that the Regional District of Nanaimo doesn't care about their water. They're doing a very good job at it, and they're doing it at a reasonable cost. So what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to build the Cadillac and have the best of all and no consideration at all to the taxpayer, just because we want to shine and look at what we did? If we try to establish this as a template for other regional districts to follow, I find that a joke. I mean, the effort should always be, what can we achieve with the least amount of money or effort? And this is not being done here. Nanaimo is doing it, and they're doing a good job at it. And so where we get off trying to tell our people here that, no, 400,000, that's just not enough. We need 1.4 million. I just don't see the justification. I think it is. I think it's pie in the sky, and I will never vote for this. Thank you.
Mr. Crothers, you would like to respond?
Yeah, I think it's worthy of providing some clarity. Director Kuhn has drawn some comparisons to the RDN. And I think it's appropriate for me to explain why and how we came to the numbers that have been presented to you for this service. I will say that, first off, and I have to reemphasize this is the maximum requisition for this service. And if you look at many of our services in the regional district, our maximum requisitions far exceed our annual budgets. This service has been presented to the committee and to the board for the future. This is going to be a 10, 15, 20-year service. And we don't build service or maximum requisition limits based on today's needs. A prudent board will look to the future and will look at what the needs may be in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. And we don't know what that future looks like. So staff have provided you with a order of magnitude budget for this service that allows for future considerations. When it comes to, and we brought the RDN to this committee to speak to this committee about the work that the RDN is doing with their watershed service. I understand that currently the RDN is considering looking at their watershed service and increasing their watershed service. It's been around for a number of years. You have to also, we don't base a service like this on the population. The scope of the service is based on the issues we deal with here in the Cowichan. We have 17 watersheds, distinct watersheds in the Cowichan. 14 of those are east flowing that are serving a populated portion of our regional district. The regional district of Nanaimo has 7. One of those is already being extensively managed by their municipal partner in the city of Nanaimo. So it's very difficult to compare apples to apples, the RDN and what they're doing, and what the CBRD is doing and what our needs will be. We've also expanded the scope, as Director Kuhn has indicated. There are some aspects of this service that are not included in the RDN. That's true, and so we have expanded the scope because staff have recommended that these are things that need to be considered in the future, and there should be the capacity to address these issues. At the end of the day, it is up to the board as to how much it requisitions every year to meet the budget. There is not a work plan attached to this service, and generally you won't find a work plan attached to a service establishment bylaw. That will come when the bylaw is established and the budget or the requisition is approved. Then staff will be coming to the subsequent board with a work plan, with an annual budget, and it's up to the board to approve that or not approve it. I don't think there's any expectation, certainly on my part as your administrator, that we are going to be requisitioning $1.4 million in the first year. I'm not expecting that. I think that would be unrealistic. Or the second year or even the third year. That will be up to future boards. And I think what's happening is people are assuming that because it says 1.4 million maximum requisition, that that's how much is going to be requisitioned every year. And that is not how services are established. You can look at many of your services and your maximum requisition limit is far above what your existing budget is. The annual year-to-year budgeting is the responsibility of the board based on recommendations from staff as to what the operational needs are in the ground. And that's how we manage all of our services. And so I wanted to make that distinction, and I also want to be clear that this is a different service than what Nanaimo is offering. We have presented a more comprehensive service based on what we heard from the community, based on what I've understood from the dialogue with the committee over the last 3.5 years. And that's what this reflects. So I just wanted to clarify that. At the end of the day, it is entirely up to the board as to how much money it wants to requisition for this, for this service.
Director Stone.
Mr. Carruthers has covered a lot of the points that I wanted to make, but you know, there are a lot of opinions and extrapolations based on the ideas that frankly it seems that many of us came to the table with before we even started down this process. But most of the concerns I hear are short-term financial concerns. What are the impacts on taxpayers? And that's absolutely appropriate and important. But we also have to take the long view and what the impacts are to the economy of our region and the health of everyone that's here, the quality of life, when inevitably we could run out of water or have our water sources contaminated or our aquifers dry up and not recharge. Those are real challenges, and talking to professionals who I trust more than my own knowledge, whether it's fisheries officers at the cleanups we did in the woods this weekend, talking about fish flows in the winter or destroying habitat because there's so much rain and we can't control those flows. Again, in our own watershed, in the Holland Creek system, to them completely drying up in the summer, not having enough water to satisfy both fish flows and to be able to provide water for the people that need it. We've seen drought during this term. Repeated times depending on your region, an extreme drought 3 years ago in Ladysmith. That was really challenging for business operators who rely on water to conduct their business, as well as the people of the region who, you know, including myself, cut down a couple of fruit trees that didn't make it through that drought. So we need to protect the water supply quantity and the quality of the water. When we approach the issues that we have in our watershed, we don't have enough information right now to make the right decision on storage. We don't understand our watershed well enough. We did a study about 7 years ago now that's already been challenged on the ground in the subsequent years of how accurate that is. And we need to take another look at it to be able to compare those baselines and give us information, understand the recharge of our reservoir, because do we raise a dam and find out that there's not enough water in the table to recharge that, have a dam that's 2 meters higher but the water never reaches the top of that dam, or do we need to lower the bottom of the reservoir so that we make sure that we get the recharge out of the system? We don't know what that answer is yet. We need to study those things. So we're obliged, at least municipally, we talk about, water, sewer, roads as our core responsibilities. And when it comes to the responsibilities around water, it's the most difficult challenge we have to make smart, fact-informed decisions on. So my feeling is we need to act responsibly and invest in the future of our region. I think the important point that was also brought up was comparing apples to oranges. When you look at, for example, Lanceville and the city of Nanaimo, both provide significant funding each year on education around water use. They have water challenges, especially in Lanceville and within the city of Nanaimo, and they spend tens of thousands of dollars a year on education. That's not included in RDN's watershed budget, but that is included in ours. There's a lot of initiatives throughout the Nanaimo Regional District that are held within different pockets, if you will, of their own budgets. So to compare very different systems and very different financial pictures of the way they've arranged their funds to one specific service within the Nanaimo Regional District, I don't think is accurate, and I could say it's more like watermelons and strawberries than apples and oranges in terms of similarity and scope. So yeah, it's very clear, and you know, I thank Director Kuhn because he put a good summary together. There's significant more that we're doing here, but when I talk about climatic, hydrometic, and water quality monitoring, those are things that we need in the northern end of the regional district, absolutely. I can only speak from the seat from the town of Ladysmith, but I know in terms of challenges with aquifers and other inhabited areas within the northern part of the regional district, it's something we need to look at. I know Saltaire's already doing work on supply issues for them moving forward. And we heard from our health officer this morning about some of the new requirements around water and some of the real challenges that they can see on the horizon in terms of the security of our supply. So I think that all of those things are very important. The most important thing is every single year the budget's going to be approved by the boards that are sitting in these seats. A $1.4 million requisition absolutely does not mean that in year one it's $7.06 per 100,000 for residential, or based on the multiplier $17.30 for a business per 100,000 of value. That budget will be approved every year based on a work plan and a strategy that would be approved by those subsequent boards. All we're doing is providing the opportunity for them to take action where necessary. So we can kick this can down the road if we'd like. We can say that it's too much, but whoever sits in these seats when budget time comes in the fall, hopefully there's at least several of us to provide some corporate memory and continuity, but whoever sits in these seats will make that decision for that budget when that comes to the table. So I'm not only absolutely comfortable supporting this, I'm going to advocate for it and campaign for it, because every single piece of fact that I can go has challenged my own assumptions around the quality and quantity of water that we have and the work that we need to do. So I just implore you, let's listen to the people that are professionals here, whether it's our fisheries officer telling us about fish flows, or it's our health officer talking about the challenges, or our own engineering staff that's saying we're going to have real challenges as we continue to be an attractive place to live and work and grow a family and retire and hopefully be born and die in this valley. There's nothing more important than water.
Director Day.
Thank you. Speaking about corporate memory, is the amended recommendation on the table?
Yes.
It's been moved and seconded.
Oh, no. Amendment was moved and seconded.
Madam Chair, all we did through to Director Day, we corrected the bylaw that's before you. There's no recommendation on the floor as is. If you'd like to put one, your recommendation would be that Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service Establishment Bylaw number 4202, as amended, be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings.
Director Day, you're moving that recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, and you'd like to speak?
Yes, please. So I just want to thank especially Director Kuhn, who's always sat across the table and we stare at each other quite often, and we've always been on opposite ends of the scale on this, and that's okay with me, because it makes me go back every time we finish our hours of discussion on this, and we've been at this quite a long time. I'd like to actually see how many hours we've discussed this, and we're still coming out, moving forward on the issue. So I applaud everybody else around the board who is a champion on this, so thank you. But back to Director Kuhn again, I just want to say that your efforts are not going unnoticed, and I thank you for bringing your perspective to this table. So I will be supporting this again, and you all know how I feel about it, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It was interesting. I always find it interesting how different perspectives look at the same issue differently. So when I heard that it would be consideration of taxpayers not to do this, I look at it as this is how you practice the utmost respect and consideration of your taxpayers, because you're asking them, as a result of a survey where they said water was a big issue for them, would you like to support this? And that's what I feel sometimes we're forgetting, that that's what this is really about, is just asking the people that come out to vote. That's a democracy. We talked about how important it was to respect volunteers. I didn't feel the tone of that was as respectful as it could have been, but I respect that that's a viewpoint, and I imagine that bylaw could be improved. I would like to respect and honor the volunteers, the professional volunteers who give of their time every month to meet on the Watershed Board, where I believe a lot of the information about SOS has come from. I would like to thank those people. And I would like us to partner with them and all of the people who rely on water, because, face it, I mean, air is the first priority because you don't live too many minutes, but you can live several months without food, but you can't live very long without water, clean, pure water. So I would like us to respect democracy, respect the time and the taxpayers' money that's already been put on this over the last 3.5 years by this board talking about it, and our staff working on it, and the volunteers who have worked on it, and ask the question. So I'm in favor of asking the question. I think that's how you respect and consider your taxpayers. Thank you.
Director Acton.
Oh, I've been on this whole time. Good thing I wasn't talking to myself. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm getting the feeling a little bit, if you don't agree completely with all this wording, you're somehow against water, but I can guarantee you that I am not against looking at our water and looking at it in this approach. I've risked being arrested. I've actually had a lawsuit against me. But, you know, in the word hopefully Director Stone used, like hopefully the next board, I have a big problem with the amount as well. The 1.4 million, because where are we going to start? And Director Marsh talked about democracy. Are we asking the communities, the people, where are we going to start with this number? We're going to say, oh, well, hopefully the board's going to do something reasonable. And I'm not trying to, I don't see that in any way. If we actually correct things, we're stopping it. I'm not suggesting stopping or so I think asking them where they would like to start, and it's not a personal thing. I personally can afford to have my taxes raised, but I am connected with a lot of young families, and trust me, they are on the edge. Like we still need to consider the finances. We still need to consider the people it's going to affect. I'm on many groups with friends on Facebook, and they're selling their kids' shoes for $5, and that's a lot of effort. So to think that it's only this much for 100,000, it's cut by 1,000 deaths sometimes, and it does add up, and we need to be conscious. And I did look at past requisitions, and I couldn't find any that were 3 times, that we had requisition for the future, like right now, a function that is 3 times bigger. So that doesn't tell me that we're going to start at 500,000. So personally, I would like to know, where are we starting? Or are we asking the people where they want to start? So I'm on the fence right now. I'm feeling really uncomfortable with the 1.4 million. Thank you.
Director Kuhn.
Yes, I'd like to emphasize again, just because I'm questioning the amount doesn't mean that I don't care about water. And this connotation that, well, without water we can't live. I mean, please, even if we don't do this project, we're not going to run out of water. This is absolutely ridiculous. Yes, we need a control of the aquifers, and we need to know where are the aquifers, how much water is there. That doesn't cost 1.4 million. We can get that, and Nanaimo does that. And earlier, I don't know who it was, said Nanaimo has only 7 watersheds. No, I have been in conversation with them. They gave me the figures. Nanaimo has 24 watersheds. They have 57 sites that they monitor. They have 46 wells that they monitor. So they're doing an awful lot of work, but they're doing it just at a more reasonable price. And to get back to the indication that, or what was said, that they're going to increase, they're going to look at an increase in the annual budget. Their bylaw quotes an amount, minimum $7 parcel tax to maximum 12. They've been sitting at $8 parcel tax for the last, I think it's 7 or 8 years. And they indicated to me that they have no plans of increasing that. And yet they could go to 12. They don't have to redo their bylaw. And yet they've been sitting on that same amount for all that time. And I would like to see us do that and sit at the same amount for any length of time. And I just don't have enough trust in that whole system. Thank you.
Director Lefebvre?
Thank you. I think this is a reasonable approach, and I just want to make 2 points that has been made before, that this is only presenting a bylaw to the public to see if they support it. So that is a control measure. I'm hopeful that they will, but the board is going to decide every year how much, based on what's brought forward by professionals in terms of studies and planning and monitoring, how much of that budget they need. So I think it's not fair to say, you know, this requires that $1,400,000 will be collected every year. That's, you know, as Mr. Carruthers has pointed out, we have many instances where we do not use full requisition. But I also think it's fair to set a requisition limit that we might meet one year, maybe never, maybe 20 years down the road. But the board is going to decide. The board is going to see what is proposed. The board is going to choose what items they support in the budget. And I think that is the control measure that is what makes this a reasonable function. Thank you.
I have Nicholson, Morrison, Stone, Marcotte, and Day. Am I correct? And then Dory.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Of course, I'm committed to investing in our future, and I think water is where it's at, and I'm pretty sure residents of Area E are very concerned about water, and I would like them to be able to look at this. So my job at this point, if this passes, is moving forward, is being able to explain what is being proposed in this bylaw. And so I've got 2 questions about, first of all, obtaining and holding water licenses. What does that mean? Because I'm presuming that's not about individual water service things.
Thank you, Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Carruthers?
So this again is looking into the future as to what situations may be facing the regional district, and the CVRD has the ability to take out water licenses in association with very specific services. There could be a situation where the CVRD, on behalf of a number of partners, may be the holder of a water license. As I've indicated many times, individual water utilities all can rely on one single watershed or one single aquifer, and there may be a strategic time in the future that the CVRD needs the ability to take and hold a water license. It's simply an opportunity that we wouldn't have to go back and ask for that after the fact. I don't have a specific example of where that might need to be, but it was a provision that we thought was important to be in here, looking forward to the future and the circumstances that the CVRD may face.
May I continue? I've got another question, but first I'd like clarification on the water licenses. So currently, we've moved to a situation where you have to have a water license for taking water out of surface waters as well as groundwater, so 2 different kinds of licenses. And so, can you clarify for me, if you have an individual utility, like Dogwood, and they need to have a new well, that should be under the Dogwoods utility, whatever it's called. So this would be something that would be outside of that, and for what?
Well, for example, you could have a situation where you desire a conservation license to store water to maintain flows on a particular watershed. The individual utilities would be for purveyors who are drawing water for the purposes of distribution. There are other categories of water licenses that the CBRD may, at some time in the future, in any of our watersheds, be wanting to explore. And this simply enables the regional district in the future that if that opportunity or need arose, that this service does allow the regional district to hold a water license for that purpose.
Is there a follow-up, Director Nicholson?
No, I'll just leave it for now. My other question is about the water management plans. What exactly are water management plans, and when would we get involved in doing one?
I'll allow Ms. Miller to add to this, but my understanding would be that this would be in accordance with the Water Sustainability Act and allow us to establish water objectives within individual watersheds that under the WSA would be enforceable and would allow us to have targets and enforce those targets. So those are the kinds of watershed management plans that we would be envisioning, or other plans that a local watershed group may want to develop in terms of stewardship of their watershed. We have one here in the Cowichan. I know that there's a group in the north that are very much interested in having a watershed management plan for their watershed. So it's broad in general. It's the watershed management plans can be whatever they will be at the time and under the existing legislation.
Okay, thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll try to be brief. A lot of points that I had have already been covered. I want to thank Director Kuhn for the information sheet. It's much easier to work from, and just on a couple of items that have been brought up, and I think these are important, and I want to thank Director Jackson for her comment about the lack of plan, and I just want to relate a discussion that was held in Mill Bay when we were consulting on what should be in and were we missing anything, and that very question was posed by a resident. You know, how many staff and desks and computers and all of that, and I said, you know, when we've done that in the past, the public gets really angry because it's like we've got a fully sussed out and hatched plan, and that we're trying to pull one over on them. So no plan, they went, I get it. So you'll develop the plan and relate that plan to the public. I think we have a very robust process that we're engaging in. We've said, what do you think's in? What have we missed? Then we're going to go forward and have a robust consultation process. I think that's important. Also for Director Acton and the issue of, you know, why the larger requisition limit and where are their functions, and that plays out where we don't requisition the maximum amount. Just in the last election, Area F and Area I went to the public about contributions to the Aquatic Center, and we knew the amounts were going to be $4,000 to $5,000. The requisition limit in the bylaw that was put to the public was $10,000 or a factor of the values. It sits at 11.9 as the maximum requisition value, and we're currently requisitioning about $4,700. And my neighbor here, his grant and aid budget is maximum requisition of $107,000, and he's got a 0 for requisition. So this is a standard practice, so it shouldn't be seen to be something that's unusual. And I think maybe just one or two other comments. I happen to know that the Nanaimo Regional District is watching keenly what's going on in Cowichan, because I think they see that some of the breadth of what is being proposed here and the possibilities are things that they may be able to look at incorporating in some of the work. I know that we're really advanced in some of our climatic study and work, and that's important when it comes to this question. And I think lastly, and again, I thank Director Kuhn for the information here. I just did a little research when we were preparing for this, and I agree, population isn't the basis to decide what the taxation is. And just another factor to add to this, the Nanaimo Regional District's overall land mass is about 2,000 square kilometers. The Cowichan Valley Regional District's land mass is just shy of 3,500 square kilometers. We're about 50% larger in land mass, and all of those, no matter where you throw a stone, you're going to hit a watershed. And I think it's important that we have the tools and the ability to be able to manage those, because water is hugely important, and not just to us, but as Director Stone had said, to the future generations. I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Director Stone, Marcotte, Day, Dory, and Kuhn.
Just a question of confirmation to staff. If you go with a lower requisition limit and you want to increase it because you have the need, you require another electoral assent to do that beyond the annual lift. So if you came at 500,000, as is advocated by some possibly, and you realize that in the next fiscal year you need $1 million, you cannot raise the requisition without electoral assent. Is that correct?
Except every so many years.
You have the ability of 24.99% every 5 years.
Every 5 years,
Every
correct.
5 years, but if you had a situation where you needed to raise the requisition, you would need assent to do that, because it would be amending the bylaw beyond the rate that's within the bylaw.
So that's, I just wanted to be clear. So, you know, we talk about watershed management plans. I'll give you an example. Our sort of failed start and stop on the watershed roundtable, as we called it, in the northern end, mostly around Ladysmith's watersheds, was partially sponsored by Timber West, and they were at the table with us. And they wanted to work on watershed management plans in conjunction with the community and the concerned stewardship groups, the fisheries groups, the sportsman clubs. Everybody was at the table. Unfortunately, we didn't have the financial resources or sort of that critical mass to keep it going, because our staff didn't have the capacity, which we hear often. This would allow us to restart that work and hopefully bring all of the stakeholders to the table and come up with a consensus-based and built watershed management plan that looks at how we forest, how we manage the watershed resources, that natural infrastructure versus the, you know, 15 million that we're spending right now on a water treatment plant because our watershed was half logged and now our turbidity is through the roof. That wasn't the way it was 8 years ago. That being said, I just want to relate a fact. Every year, the board is required under legislation to review and approve a budget, and that goes function by function. We often have discussions on certain areas, so that's a fact. It's not a hope, a desire. That's a reality. What's required. So regardless of the requisition limit, the budget will have to be approved by the board every year.
Director Marcotte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me, I have studied this, and there just isn't enough information for me to actually be comfortable supporting this. I think that the thing that concerns me a lot is that each of our areas probably have very different watershed amounts in their area, and I am obviously one of the lowest ever. So I really don't like us just being lumped all together and call that a watershed. I just need more information, and without some more hard details, you know, we are not the same. We may think we are, but we're not. I'm definitely different. I have less water than anyone else, and it may be that we need to stand alone on our watershed. So I'm not going to support this as it is.
Director Dory.
Thank you, Madam Chair. as everyone around the table, I believe that water is important. And I believe that the administrator has done a terrific job going out to the communities, informing them of this bylaw and talking to people and stirring up interest, and staff, as the rest of the staff as well. I believe that the principles that they are proposing are valid and valuable, and but the issue I have is with money. I believe that that you should start low and careful and move ahead in a gradual manner. This is not going to be something that's an emergency today. In most cases, and if it was, it should have been approached by now. I know in my area there have been several studies on the watersheds, lots of them, and Ladysmith's done lots of them. So we've got a pretty good picture of the watersheds, and so that to me, for me personally, and I think for Ladysmith, there's no issue about how much water there is, and they know about the other sources. Director Stone made me disagree with me, but we've been looking at it. So basically it's about money. I just finished reading this book called Yes, and it's got to do with getting consent to do things. And one of the ways, if you had an auction, you'd start with a lower number than a higher number. When you start with a higher number, you scare people off, you scare buyers off, and in this case, you might scare voters off. So, and the other thing it said in that book would make Director Kuhn feel comfortable is that it's good to have an outlier in your group. It keeps you honest, it keeps you thinking, and it keeps you verifying your facts and verifying that your path forward. So this has been you know, a good effort, and I believe that the Watershed Board will do a good job. But my value is that you're going to scare the voters off by starting off too high. And if the whole thing crumbles under a referendum, then you might think that we started too high. You're allowed to raise the requisition 25% every 5 years. So if you started at 800,000, you could be to $1 million in 5 years, and after that you could be to 12 million and going to 13 million after that. So I believe in being careful, starting low, and not scaring the voters off. Thank you.
Okay, I have Director Kuhn, and then I have Stone, Walker, Acton, and Marsh, and we have like 12 minutes currently. We will carry on. We have to leave here at 11:45, so 7 minutes. Okay, so Director Kuhn.
I'll try to be quick. There was a point brought up that I wasn't going to bring up because I didn't want to look very selfish for my area, but it was a good point, and that is there are different areas that need more, let's say, investigation, or that need more care. If you look at the West End, we don't need any of that stuff because we don't need to look for aquifers. We have aquifers that are supplying us with more water than we can possibly use. And we've got the big lake. But apart from that, another point I'd like to make is there's an item that is proposed, and that is financial support to approved advisory boards. And that includes, I presume, the Watershed Board and the Cowichan Lake and River Stewardship Society and all these organizations. I had a call to the BC government, and I had a fairly long discussion with a person that is pretty up on what's happening. And that person told me, yes, there were several delegations down in Victoria, and there were discussions between the ministry and the CVRD. And so I asked, well, what are the plans exactly? What is going to happen there? And that person told me, well, I have to tell you, the BC government at this stage has no plans. And I said, what do you mean? So the end result was, yes, there have been inquiries made, but there are no plans on the side of the BC government to proceed with anything. So to me, what that means is we're going there kind of, we're trying to be shovel ready. We want to have everything in place, the financing in place and everything, and then we're going to approach the BC government and say, oh, look at how good we are. We've done everything possibly to achieve this. So could you please give us the powers now? And so I question that whole approach, and I leave it at that.
Okay, that we actually need that the meeting, the Regional Services Committee meeting needs to adjourn to reconvene after the conclusion of the April 25th board meeting. Is there a seconder? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried.
Madam Chair, just through to the directors and the people in the audience, you're going to reconvene after the board meeting. The time of the board meeting is 1:30, so this meeting may not start until later. You're going to a function right now. We must have a quorum back by 1:45. If we don't have a quorum by 1:45, there will be no board meeting, and this meeting will reconvene whenever we have a quorum for here. So it's really critical that you be back. For those in the audience, who knows what time, it'll be after today's board meeting when we reconvene.